Hey everybody, this is Perch. I had this idea that I'd like to still do, and I will try, but maybe you guys can help me in the comments or through mail or anything. I'm looking for a good video editor that will allow me to probably using AI. Uh, I know a lot of creative friends just spit out their coffee in disgust, but basically, I want to do a not something creative. I want to animate something dry, like numbers. So think about like the comic graphs that I've done for the comic numbers videos. I would like to, instead of using a PowerPoint animation to show kind of bars growing and things like that, instead have it animate from keyframe to keyframe. I don't want anything fancy with it. I don't want I don't need a custom character. I don't need somebody ripping off Jack Kirby's likeness to put something in there. I'm looking for a smarter version of PowerPoint animations. That's what I'm looking for. So or Keynote or something like that. Anyway, I'm looking for that because I have this idea in my head about the comic business. Because to me, I'm a visual, despite the fact that the all of you know me through really crude videos, talking in the car, still images on the screen for long periods of time. I am a visual thinker. I think in pictures and then I translate it to words. I always have. So really, really complex things, whether it's, I did a bit where I was helping kind of explain some things in fintech. And I was, I had the picture in my head and then I came up with the words around it. It's why when I've had to do presentations or PowerPoint or that kind of stuff, it's very easy for me because I can visualize it and then I draw the picture and then off it goes. Anyway, in my mind, the comic business, and more specifically, the problem in the comic business is really easy to understand if you can visualize it through imagery. But I hear people get it wrong all the time, again, in my opinion. But in this case, I feel like I have a lot of evidence for my opinion. It's not a random opinion. It's an opinion having been a retailer for a long period of time, having studied the business, having, really, some education in this area, having the MBA, all that. And again, I'm not citing my credentials for, well, maybe I am, fuck it. But it's not a casual opinion. It's a long thought with and researched opinion. And I hear people get it, in my opinion, wrong all the time. And it's usually because they're focusing on one aspect and not thinking about the entire group. So I would like to explain it visually. I struggle to tell people they're wrong or to call it out because if I say something like, this guy is wrong, then I'm setting off kind of World War III with a YouTuber or a commentator or somebody like that. And we've seen that. I had there are a couple things, but I'd called somebody wrong in a classic Perch, like, milk toast benign way, I did David Pepos, and the guy lost his effing mind. And there is not a tolerance on the internet, which some people cite to, well, this was when Trump came around, everybody went crazy, both left and right, and they just started fighting with each other. And the timeline is that's when it got much worse, but I think it was gonna get worse anyway. It was going that direction. People just have very little tolerance for other people's opinions. It doesn't matter how nice or polite you are with it. If you say something that, is at all, um, negative or controversial, then you're gonna get, it's people immediately goes to personal. And I talk to a lot of different people. I've chatted with Snyder. I've chatted with Gail Simone. Her in text more recently, but in person before. I've chatted with Joe Casada. I've chatted with Wes from Thinking Critically. Everybody's going to love that I'm lumping everyone together. One of those guys specifically told me not to do that, but anyway, my point though is they say things to me, and I don't agree with all those things. But if I don't agree, first of all, I rarely say so because I'm just tired. It's not worth it. I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. But if I argue with it or say, you know what, actually, I don't think that's right. Um, I'm not doing it from a perspective of, yeah, and I hate your children and want you to, you should die a miserable death in hell. It's just literally like, hey, I have a different opinion. Here's some things you might not realize. Whatever. That's literally it. there's, in with the vast majority of people I talk to, and I'm sure the same is true with you, you're not in a blood feud with somebody who has a different opinion with you. You just have a different opinion. I hope. There's a major difference between, Wes, for example, saying, Wes saying Arby's has great food, and me saying, well, you're out of your mind. I don't wish, I'm declaring an infantana against Wes. No, it just, he likes bad food, apparently. I say with love. It's way different than somebody who comes in and, says something along the lines of like, you know, I, your, your children deserve to be molested, for example. YouTuber has made those comments. Yeah, that guy, absolutely, that person's dead to me. But the way that works is I don't engage in that person's conversation. Creator once asked me, like, why do you mention some of these people that you disagree with? It's like, because I have a different opinion with them, but I still feel like there's a conversation to be had. Somebody who, goes after my family, or, attacks somebody with personal kind of venom, I tune out really, really fast, including when it's not me. When I'm watching, the hardest thing sometimes is watching friends go at each other, and then one of them decides to go super, super personal. And it's like, yeah, yeah, I'm dipping out. That that's, I can't support that. I just fade out. And for some of you, I know it's more fun to go in there and really throw some punches and brawl. For me, it's nah. I'm just, you're dead to me, for lack of a better word. So, but I have, as I said, I have a lot of opinions on the comic business. Um, One thing to recognize, and it's the unspoken secret, but it's true, and it does invalidate some people's arguments for sure, but it doesn't make it less true. Is that the social media game, whether you're on Twitter or Blue Sky or YouTube, and everybody goes after YouTubers for monetizing things, but people are monetizing on Twitter. They're doing it on Blue Sky. They're doing it everywhere. Even everything. There is a power element. Even if you're on Reddit, if you're a Reddit monitor is about right, moderator. You're monetizing that popularity, meaning you're gaining power from that role. And so as a result, you are motivated to give more spicy takes. You are not motivated to be Perch. Perch is milk toast and dull, and is the beige of color commentators. Several of you, when I do get heated about something, which does happen, you're like, oh wow, I love this Perch. Yeah, I'm sure you do, because it's more entertaining. But it's not me. If you want somebody who's going to scream into the microphone every time, there are plenty of options for you, but I'm not one of them. So as a result, a lot of the people who come in regularly, my audience, are comfortable with that. You're comfortable with this. That's what you're looking for. Good for you. Um, it is like, I did this video a while back around, our comics dying, and it's very common, by the way, for some of these people to misinterpret me and say, well, Perch also says they're dying. No, never have. That doesn't mean there isn't trouble. Um, the comic business, if I can explain kind of the boring reality of where things are going. And this is probably a video into itself, because I'll make this point, that the money point, in a different place, because it deserves to be isolated, not with all this other crap. But the comic business has multiple parts to it. You cannot fix one part in isolation and none of the other parts and be successful. And one of the areas that, I've seen in the comments on these videos, I see it other places, that people often go to, is like the number one thing that Marvel or DC, for example, has to do is get rid of the ideology. Stop doing the woke ideology, and everything will be fine. And the answer is, that's just, there's no truth to that. There's none. You have multiple parts to fix, and frankly, that's not the most important one. There's going to be a lot of examples, and a good one is when Bud Light stopped using the spokesman. I don't remember that person's name. Dylan. They did this brief thing with Dylan, and the stock suffered, and it was like go woke, go broke, and there was all this kind of, and then people were manipulating the numbers and all that other kind of stuff. Well, it did now what now has it changed now? They haven't used Dylan recently. Has everybody gone, well, all right, they learned their lesson. Let's all go buy some Bud Light. No. Cracker Barrel just announced this morning that they're going back to the old logo. They heard the fans and people missed the old man on the rocking chair, so they're going back to that logo. I think they miss out on the point that logo is overly complicated. With the old man on the rocking chair, it just is. Now, I again, I think I said somewhere else. The new logo looks lazy and dumb, but you know that if you're a graphic designer, you know exactly what I'm talking about right now. That thing is going to be a pain in the ass, but whatever. They're free to do what they want. Do you think that because they've gone back to the old logo, suddenly people are going to go swarming back into Cracker Barrel and be like, oh, okay, you learned your lesson. Now here we are. No, it's first of all the controversy over it from a consumer, meaning people who are actually going to Cracker Barrel, not angry about Cracker Barrel, but going into Cracker Barrel. I doubt their clientele changed much at all. I know some people posted some pictures on Twitter like the entire restaurant's empty. Okay, gonna have to see some proof that you're not doing that, first customer in the door, or it's not manipulated in some way. I just gonna have to see some proof on that. But the actual customers coming in, were they insanely bothered by the logo and stuff so much that they are going to now take their business to Applebee's? I mean, it's just like this gets to be kind of a lunatic conversation. I'm not saying bad corporate marketing decisions, branding decisions are bad decisions. Clearly, they upset their customer base, and that kind of attention is bad. But my point here is, if suddenly they reverse course, and they have, does it fix everything? No. Cracker Barrel is still down the list of popular food chains. They do not serve food that is popular with the masses of America before or after. There's a place for them, the kind of Southern comfort food, but it is not the hot food item that's going to have those restaurants bursting at the seams with customers. It wasn't before, it wasn't after. You can't just fix one element and expect everything to return to normal. If you are comic books, you can't just give, Carol Danvers bigger tits and go, now we're done. We're good now. You can't, and I understand the ideology is not one, focused on, Miss Marvel's breast, but imagine if it was. Anyway, you've got a lot of things you have to address. And again, frankly, you've heard me say this before. Price is an issue. Distribution is a bigger issue. And like I said, I'll go through that in another video with some numbers, but if you can't fix where the comics are, and don't give me that, yeah, but if they're woke, no one will buy them if they're everywhere. Oh, really? So if we go to the different stores, we go to different media, we see things that are quote unquote very woke, and whether they're underperforming or not, still selling millions of units. You're saying that distribution has no impact on scale. Yeah, no. Sorry, that's not how economics works. You've got to fix that problem. Does the quality of the comics, need to be better across the board if they want to sustain? Sure, always. Absolutely. But you have fundamental parts of the supply chain that comics struggle with, and it puts a ceiling over their head. And until you fix that, they're not going to grow. But I'll throw one little thing out, and like I say, I'll go into it in more depth another time. But back in the 80s, the late 80s, you had a lot of comics with returnability, which complicates things, but let's ignore that for a moment, selling 250,000 copies. That was kind of it's about 175, 200, 250. There are a lot of comics were in that zone that were middle upper. You'd say like, I was looking at these numbers for Fantastic Four recently. I was doing a big ass sales retrospective that went back into the 60s, but Fantastic Four in the 80s was doing, I think, 175,000, close to 200,000 copies sold a month. Now, there was returnability, so several of those comics were coming back, meaning they weren't actually selling through that amount. But they're selling that. Today, Fantastic Four, struggles in the 45 to 50,000 range. Okay, so I'm going to keep the math really simple so we can wrap this video up. But 200,000 copies in the 80s, 50,000 copies today. All right, so you look at that and you go, oh wow, it's a reduction. It's a 4x. It's a reduction by 4, right? 50 times 4 equals 200. So very simple reduction by 4. 1/4 of the sales of what it was in the 80s. And you say, oh, wow, that's a disaster. Okay, yeah, it's bad. We'd rather have 200, right? The channels that Fantastic Four in, meaning the shops, by all accounts, I've seen this math different places. I had it wrong when I was talking to a friend last night. There is a you're talking about a 75x, not 75%, 75 times reduction. Or putting it another way, 1/75th of the stores are carrying Fantastic Four today than they were in the 80s. In the 80s, you had gas stations, you had supermarkets, you had, so in some cases, kind of bigger retail stores. You had comic shops, but you had all these places. Today, you have the direct market comic shops. That's it. So you have 1/75th the amount of stores carrying comics. It's because gas stations are very prevalent. So are supermarkets. So you have a 1/75th of the stores are carrying Fantastic Four, and you have a 1/4 reduction. It would be dishonest, intellectually, financially dishonest to say, well, 1-to-1, it should be, Fantastic Four should be selling 1/75th of that number. It should be selling, I mean, it should be selling nothing because of that reduction in volume. But the reality is people still go to comic shops, everything else. But I want to just put that in perspective because it highlights why distribution is really the problem when you think about scale. It also highlights that while comics have fallen off, comic books are in so few channels they used to be in that they're actually holding up better than you think. This isn't only the most dishonest, disingenuous, douchebag people will interpret what I just said as Perch says comic books are fine. No, there are problems, but just to put it in perspective, that drop in locations of comics to sale is massive, massive. And comic books still have reduced, but not equivalent to the locations they've dropped from, which indicates pricing. Pricing is still way too high, no doubt about it. But pricing is still your secondary problem. Distribution is your primary problem. Anyway, thanks for listening.